A lot of people seem to think that shifting your state of being means you're also changing your self-concept, but that's not true. Your state of being fluctuates all the time, but it's your self-concept that can create lasting transformation. Hello my loves, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. My name is Lorena, I'm a somatic self-concept and identity coach, and I support you in bridging the gap between who you currently are or perceive yourself as and who you desire to be or become. Most people confuse their self-concept with their state of being. And while the two are related, and in some contexts you can use them interchangeably, they are not the same. Today I'm going to break down why understanding the difference and knowing how to change both your state of being and your self-concept is key to lasting transformation and results. So what exactly is your self-concept and how is it different from your state of being? Your self-concept is the same as your identity, and it's your perception of yourself. It's who you think you are. It's the way you see yourself and the identity that you embody and live from. And because it's also the core of who you are, it's often so deeply ingrained and so unconscious that you might not even be aware that this is your identity. It's like you're too close to it. Do you know when something is so natural and normal to you, you don't even question it? It's like when you're wearing a necklace for so long that you don't even remember what it felt like before you put it on. So when you take on a label as an identity, which often happens unconsciously, it's really easy to forget who you are beyond the labels, because over time it's all you know. And your self-concept is really important because it determines what's even possible for you in your reality. If on some level you operate from an identity or from a self-concept where you see yourself as someone that isn't even capable of having a beautiful relationship or success in your career, it won't be possible for you. It could be right in front of you, and you could be trying really hard, but you're just not going to be able to let it in. So what's really important to know is that changing your self-concept is not a surface level process. It's not something that you can do through a few mindset shifts and saying some affirmations, contrary to popular belief. Despite the fact that I do sometimes use the word shift because sometimes the changes can be so radical when it comes to your self-concept, I always tell my clients in Recreate Yourself that it's not so much a shift, it's more of a rebirth. It's a peeling off of all the layers of your consciousness, everything that's not you, until you're at the core, until you basically have a blank slate from which you can step into any version of yourself that you want to be. So given that it's a rebirth and it requires this process of dismantling and peeling off the layers, it's not something that happens overnight. It's not a quick shift. It's a transformation at the core of your being and at the depths of your subconscious. So your self-concept determines what's possible for you. And whilst it's not a quick and easy process, it is changeable. It's not set in stone. It just requires a really intentional, emotionally integrated and embodied process so that the changes in your identity can be sustained and the patterns in your external circumstances and your internal behavior can truly be broken. So now that you have the context of what your self-concept is and what it takes to transform it, let's put that into comparison with your state of being. Let's explore what your state of being is, what makes the two different, and then we'll go into some more common misconceptions, and I'll also tell you which one of the two to prioritize and why and how. So your state of being is different from your self-concept because it's just a temporary state. It's not constant at all. It's always in flux. You're probably now not in the same state that you were in when you even started watching this video a few minutes ago. The good thing about this is that means that your state of being can be changed really quickly. It's also important to know that your state of being is not about your mood either. It's more about your nervous system state. And you can change your nervous system state right now. Just by taking a few deep breaths, your state will change. If then later on your child starts crying and throwing a tantrum, your state will change. It's not the goal to be in the same state of being all the time. It's fairly impossible and also not very healthy. Your state of being is also not mental. It's not about your mindset. If it were mental, it would be called state of mind, which is another thing. but it's your state of being. It's how you are being, it's how you are feeling. Now, just because your state of being is always in flux doesn't mean it's not important. It's also important for your self-concept. And it's important for your reality because it impacts your reactions to external circumstances a lot. But it just doesn't have to be the same constantly, whereas your self-concept tends to be fairly solid on a moment-by-moment basis. You're not shaken out of who you think you are just because something good or something bad happens. Whereas you can be shaken out of the state of being that you're in when you get triggered. It's like your self-concept is the root of a tree. It's deep and stable. And your state of being is like the weather, right? It fluctuates. But also the more stable it is and the longer it's stable, the more the root of the tree can grow, right? The more the root of the tree, the more your self-concept can hold. Now, before we go deeper into some common misconceptions, I do have a free resource for you linked in the description box below. It's my free self-concept mastery blueprint. It really takes apart the difference between your state of being and your self-concept. It goes into the method that I teach to transform both and to keep it sustainable and to make it effective. Have some accountability and begin to see some changes in your life right away. Now that you have an overview of what your state of being is, what your self-concept is, let's go a bit deeper. Why do people even confuse the two? I often see the two used interchangeably, and in some ways it can be because both are about embodiment. Both are about the way you are being and feeling. And I also often see both your state of being and your self-concept used in the context of manifestation, which it's about so much more than that. It's also about the way you feel, the way you react to your external circumstances, the way you show up when life isn't going perfectly, how you feel about yourself and within yourself, how you carry yourself, how confident you are. Now, your state of being doesn't necessarily need emotional integration. Your self-concept, however, does. Your state of being can be influenced really quickly just through your body. That isn't necessarily maintained, but it can be influenced really quickly. And sometimes your state of being can feel like an identity, right? Let's say you're very frequently in a state of activation where you feel very anxious. You can accidentally turn your anxiety into an identity, into a self-concept. You can see yourself as an anxious person because that is the state that you're most frequently in. Or let's say you're in a trauma response where you begin fawning or people-pleasing. Well, you might now take on the identity of being a people pleaser, and that might even be your self-concept, but it's not who you are at the core, and it's also not who you want to be. Now, you can see how in these cases, and honestly for most people, although your state of being and your self-concept are not the same, we need to work on both. Most people need to work on both. They are kind of both equally important, but just for different reasons. And they are both approached differently. So in my coaching program, Recreate Yourself, I give you the foundational tools to change your habitual state of being. And when I say habitual state of being, I mean the state of being that you are in the majority of the time. So although your state of being fluctuates, you will have a state of being that you return to the most often, based on what's known to you, based on your external circumstances, based on your emotional experience, based on the trauma that you haven't processed, and so on. So when we work on this, it's not like you're always going to be in the same state, right? Your state of being will still shift, but your go-to state will change. And that is also really important, and I will get to why. But more importantly, what we do and what I teach is that we really transform your self-concept from the ground up. Yes, we rewire your nervous system, but we also go really deep into your unconscious mind, resolving emotional charges, healing from the past, and so much more. Both are equally important because let's say you only focus on your state of being. Now you feel good temporarily, but you constantly have to manage your state. You constantly go through these highs and lows, which is what many people do. You get activated, you get triggered, and then you regulate, you take some breaths, and that's great, but you don't want to be on this hamster wheel of constantly having to manage your state. It's very exhausting. When you go through these ups and downs, your reality doesn't really change because your core identity, your self-concept hasn't changed. Now, a grounded shift in your habitual state of being gives your nervous system the opportunity to get really stable in a way that it builds a foundation for the self-concept changes that you can then make to get really solid. Because if your nervous system isn't regulated, you'll constantly be bumping up against old patterns, no matter how much you try to shift your perception of yourself. Which brings me to what happens when you only focus on your self-concept and you neglect your state of being. Well, now you do all this mindset work, but it's almost like it's not fully integrated, it's not fully embodied, because you can never really hold the new reality or the new identity. No matter how much work you do on your self-perception or your mindset or your attitude towards yourself, you might unconsciously still self-sabotage or avoid or people please. Without working on your state of being in a sustained way, not a way where you constantly manage the ups and downs of it, your self-concept will only change at a surface level. To give you an example, imagine you've been visualizing yourself being confident, but your nervous system is still stuck in fear, and it returns to that place often. Now, no matter how confident you think you are in the moment, this fear will always pull you back. And that's because your state of being is too dysregulated to accept whatever you are visualizing. So your state of being may shift rapidly, but your self-concept determines what is truly possible for you. Changing your self-concept, transforming your self-concept, going through this full-blown rebirth that I'm talking about, that gives you the ability to sustain the shifts and to hold new realities. So which one should you work on first? Your state of being or your self-concept? Well, in Recreate Yourself, we work on both of them in tandem because they usually do go hand in hand a little bit, but it's also really personal to each person. It depends on where you're at. For example, if you come to me as a client and your nervous system is completely frazzled because you've experienced a lot of trauma, you're in circumstances that don't keep you safe or that don't make you feel safe, we need to work on getting your state of being stable first before we can do any deeper identity work. Or if you're stuck in your head, we need to get you into the body so that you can accept, let in the embodied feeling of the identity that you want to live from. Or maybe you carry a lot of unresolved trauma. Well, that will need to be dealt with because that will impact both your state of being and your self-concept. So there's no fixed answer as to this is definitely what you do first. It's a very personal process. I would need to get to know what's going on for you. I would need to experience your state and your self-concept and your patterns firsthand, but both are equally important for different reasons. Now, there are some mistakes and misconceptions about changing your self-concept and changing your state of being. Number one, a lot of people focus on their mood over their nervous system state. So they try to micromanage their emotions rather than actually working on their state of being. I have a separate video about why your state of being is not the same thing as your mood, so you may want to check that out. I will link it below for you. Another mistake, which I already touched on, is that people do a lot of mindset work for their self-concept, but they neglect embodying this feeling deeply. So you may try to think yourself into a new identity, but you haven't embodied it. This is similar to trying to visualize or affirm yourself into a new self-concept without doing the emotional integration work that will actually make it stick. Visualization and affirmations are not bad tools. People often think I'm shitting on them. I'm not. I think they can be really useful and really supportive, but they just won't work unless you're addressing the emotional and nervous system level, because you won't be able to really let it land in your body and in your being. So it requires a lot of intentional work and a safe container for you to resolve this. Another mistake is people trying to change their self-concept from unresolved trauma. It's the trauma that keeps you stuck in your old self-concept. So if you don't address that, you're just trying to put a plaster on a wound that needs deeper care. Next, you may regulate your nervous system in the moment, but your habitual state of being doesn't change. So this is what I was speaking about earlier with the highs and lows. You're constantly micromanaging your state that way. That's not fun. You could also make the mistake of thinking that a temporary high vibe state or high vibe mood means that you've changed your self-concept. Not the same thing. So what I mean is that you shift your state of being, you feel good, but then old patterns pop back up. This is usually a sign that the deeper self-concept work hasn't been done yet. You might feel good after a short practice, but it doesn't last. Let me know if you've ever experienced that, where you think you shift your state and you feel good after a practice or a meditation, but then you go back into the old pattern, the old thought cycles and spirals, because the consequence of all of these mistakes that I just spoke about is that you go in cycles, that external patterns still repeat. You might have unhealthy coping mechanisms, you might self-sabotage, you could feel stuck or unable to move forward. That can all show up. And this is where many of my clients are at, and what tends to inspire them to work with me and recreate yourself, because the work we do inside gives you the foundation in your state of being so that you can be really grounded and non-reactive. And it transforms your self-concept and integrates and heals the patterns from the past that keep you stuck in the past. It's a full-blown rebirth, and these changes are and should be felt. You'd be able to feel it in their energy too. So you absolutely need both. Your self-concept and your state of being. Your self-concept is the identity that has the potential, when you change it, to also change your reality. And your state of being is the foundation that lets you hold and expand into it. Let me know if you've ever confused your self-concept and your state of being, if this video was useful and insightful for you, and let me know which one you currently need to focus on more. And in next week's video, I'm going to share with you 7 things that you did not know about your self-concept. Tune back in then, subscribe if you haven't already so that you don't miss it, and I'll see you next week.